Welcome to the About podcast. Here we explore your financial health in simple and easy to understand ways.
All right, well, welcome to the About podcast. My name is Jeremy Scott, one of your hosts here, and we are glad to greet you once again. I, of course, am joined by Roy Hucke of Credentialed Wealth Advisors, who we haven't really shouted out in a while, I don't feel like.
That's true. We could shout them out more.
And that is sort of the reason we do this. I mean, your interest in that area, and you're pretty much the primary sponsor of our little endeavor here. So I feel like we should. So credentialedwealth.com, I believe.
That's correct.
There we go. So Roy, how you doing?
I'm awesome. It's great to be back.
It is.
It's been a little bit.
It is. It's been a little bit. Hey, thanks for letting me borrow your equipment the other day.
My pleasure. I saw the video.
Yeah, did you? Yeah. So I also have a YouTube channel where I review live streaming stuff, and I wanted to review something that I couldn't afford to buy, but thankfully Roy bought it. So I got to go to his place.
Foundry Development.
Foundry.dev.
Shout out.
There you go. All right.
It was good.
So we help each other out around here. So. All right. Well, we are not alone today, thankfully. It's always better when we have guests. And today we get to give more than just a shout out to Jennifer Hanson of Helping Hands Consulting. I think right before we hit record, I told you that's my sister's name, Jennifer, so that's going to be really easy for me. Is it Jennifer, Jen, Jenny?
Jennifer or Jen?
Jennifer or Jen. Okay.
It's
exactly
so funny
like my
it's
sister.
usually Jennifer or Jen, and people do not like Jenny.
No, my
I
sister.
don't know many people.
Oh, man, you want to make my sister mad, call her Jenny.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, well, we're glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So you're here to talk about a couple of important things that you work on. Medicaid, and we've done a little bit on Medicare.
Yep.
Before.
So to kind of preface this a little bit, so I was introduced to Jennifer by one of our other guests, Carolyn Saunders, who we had on, and spoke about long-term care and those kinds of things.
Yeah. That's what I was confused by when you said. I'm like, oh, is that person coming back?
Yeah.
No, wrong person.
So a friend of a friend here.
Friend of a friend.
But anyways, the introduction was made by Carolyn, and I told Carolyn that I've been looking for a Medicaid expert, and it's one of those things where my profession, I work with people who have investments to manage, and I don't usually run across Medicaid people specifically, which we'll learn. If people don't know, we'll learn more about what that actually means to be on a Medicaid situation. But I have friends and family that run into this stuff, and they need help. And you as a pastor, I'm sure, have run into this as well, where Medicaid is something that is a resource that's needed, and it's not really well understood. And Carolyn got us together. We got to meet and chat a little bit, and I think it'll be awesome to hear more about you and your process and what you guys do to help people and how that really works. Because I was actually talking to someone the other day that they're like, well, we're going to try and maybe do it on our own. And I'm just like, are you sure? And I told him kind of what you had told me just about the process. And I'm like, you might want to call her and just see. I think they did call you, by the way. Maybe. I don't know.
Okay.
We'll talk about that off.
Okay, perfect.
But anyway, so give us a little bit, let's say, about your company, about how you kind of got to this area, like why, and how you kind of end up in Colorado. Because if people don't notice, so I'm just going to give you a heads up, she has a little bit of an accent.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I might have noticed that.
A little interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it may be easier if I just start and just take 1 minute and just kind of high level explain what Medicaid is.
Sure.
Medicaid is essentially the government program that provides health insurance to people who are low income or low assets. I think it's important to know before I just jump into what I do is Medicaid's one word, but it's important to know that it's not one thing. What this one word Medicaid is actually a bunch of small Medicaid programs. And I would say, typically speaking, they're all out there to target a specific population of people. Okay, so there's one that really targets family and children's, or people that, single individuals that lose their job. There's one that targets maybe people who are disabled but can still stay in the workforce. And so on. But the one I specialize in is called long-term care Medicaid.
Okay.
And it's the only program that's going to help anyone cover a long-term care service. Okay. So that's going to be care in the home, additional care in the home, assisted living, or nursing facility. So essentially how I got started was, I became the long-term care specialist at the state Medicaid office. I moved out here from Mississippi, and pretty much my first real job, so to speak, out here was I was the long-term care policy specialist. So essentially I was the state expert in long-term care Medicaid. And on a daily basis, my essentially role in that was to, any new policy that was implemented by CMS, we implemented it in the rule. I would train the counties, any very complicated cases that came through, they would escalate to me, for interpretation. And just on a daily basis in that role, I'd get a call from a client, a family, a social worker, sometimes financial advisors trying to help people and escalate their case to me. They stood in line at the county for 6 months and got denied. They were in a nursing facility the whole time, so now they have a $50,000 bill.
Oh my!
And they were trying to escalate their case to me to see if I could look at it and say, "County, you did it incorrect. You were supposed to approve them and not deny them." And most of the time in that role, I found I just couldn't do anything. It was a valid denial. Like, the reality is, long-term care Medicaid is complicated, and people don't know what they don't know. They get into the process thinking they can do it on their own. And then mistakes are costly. When you're accruing a bill in a nursing facility at $8, $10, $15,000 a month, it takes 4 or 5 months to get that denial, and Medicaid is not going to cover that stay. That's a very costly mistake, So what I found in that role is a lot of times people just thought it was easy and it's not. Right. Or they hired the wrong professional, You
mean there's government programs that are complicated and hard to navigate?
Right, exactly.
I'm shocked.
I know.
I'm utterly shocked by this.
Right, exactly. So in March 2010, I quit my job at the state Medicaid office to start helping Hands Consulting, essentially with the purpose of just providing a knowledgeable and affordable source that families can hire, to help them through the process. So, essentially we specialize with anything with long-term care Medicaid eligibility.
Okay. So you quit your job in Mississippi?
Here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you moved here first.
Yep,
you were working for the state of Colorado.
Yep.
Got it. And you quit that, and then you started your Helping Hands business in Colorado.
Yep.
Which is important to note for folks that Medicaid is not only many little programs, it's handled differently at different states.
Yes.
So we're specifically in Colorado. So today when we're talking about things, just everybody know that it's Colorado that we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. Yep, Colorado Medicaid. So, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit, just, sidebar here. People always ask, is Medicaid a federal program or a state program? And the best way I like to explain it is to say it's like a contract between the two. The federal government basically said, hey, we've, created this program called Medicaid that states can help your constituents, can help your, state population for people who are low income, low asset, who can't afford health insurance. So a lot of states were like, sure. And even the federal government said, hey, heck, we'll help pay for it, And so what you're going to find across state lines that a lot of states operate the same, I always say like A through L, with criteria A through L. To get the federal funds, you've got to operate a particular way to a certain point. And then because the other portion of the expenditure is from the state taxpayer dollars, the federal government gives the states the ability to pick other options. So criteria M through Z, you're going to find is different from state to state. Okay. That state gets to decide how, liberal or conservative they want to be, like what, if they want to cover like extra populations of people or not, or, interpretation of a particular rule, if they want to implement it to be more restrictive or not. And that's where you're going to see it varies greatly, across state lines. So I actually helped my grandfather in Mississippi get on long-term care Medicaid. And he was eligible there, but he would not have been eligible in Colorado. Just by virtue of the way they look at life insurance policies different. Okay. So just little things like that, but in addition, so even if you are, if you live in Wyoming and you're on Wyoming Medicaid, it's administered by the state. So that person would have gone to the Wyoming Medicaid office, applied, been on Wyoming Medicaid. If they then move to Colorado because their daughter lives here, they have to start all over in the state of Colorado.
Oh.
Okay. So nothing transfers. So even though there is a federal component of it, nothing transfers across state lines. Okay. Even if they had provided, Wyoming all the documents. So they didn't keep the documents themselves. They handed it over to the, Wyoming office. And now the state of Colorado is asking for those same documents. There's no file transferring system, none of the above. Start all over. They don't get escalated to the top. They're going to stand in the same line that every other Colorado resident standing in line here.
And do you have to wait until you actually move to that state before you can even apply?
Technically, you're not a resident. Yes. In order to...
So you're moving on a hope that you're gonna get your benefit. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I can see a lot of people getting stuck.
Yeah. Part of the criteria for all Medicaid programs, not just long-term care, is that you have to be a Colorado resident.
Yeah.
In order to be a resident, you have to have stepped foot across the state line with no intention to return where you previously, came. Now, one of the things we do know, I have found that's kind of a little niche of ours, is that a lot of families hire us because their mom's in New Jersey. You know what I mean? And she can't manage her life anymore. So it's time to move her here. And she's going to need Medicaid day one. So we do a lot of those types of cases. And what we do to try to get ahead of the game just a little bit, you can't get too far ahead, but we'll submit, like if I know they bought a plane ticket for, February 1st to bring mom here, or they're, flying out and they're going to be, coming across the state line around February 1st in their car or whatever have you. Sometimes we'll submit the application like 2 weeks before. Now on there, we'll say, we'll put on there like, hey, we expect them to move to this address effective this date, and maybe put an additional cover letter. But so you can maybe get started like a few weeks in advance. And we do that just to get through some of the administrative process of applying, and by the time anybody even really looks at it, they're already here.
Yeah.
But you can't really do it much before that, too much before that. So. Yeah. So a lot of times people do sometimes choose to keep their loved one, in New Jersey because they do feel like it's too big of a risk, to try to start all over. They have Medicaid there, you know what I mean? Like, and start all over and take a risk of not getting it here.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that would just be, oh my gosh, I can't imagine.
So if somebody is in a situation where they're disabled, younger person that's disabled and they're on assistance, is that typically Medicaid or is that a different program?
It can be Medicaid, so anyone receiving Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, a benefit of SSDI is after, 2 years after your disability onset date, you're eligible for Medicare. Okay. So a lot of individuals that are on, we'll say quote unquote disability, because that's what usually is just the broad term people use, are ultimately become Medicare eligibles soon after. But there are individuals who, so what do you do in those 2 years, right?
Right.
A lot of those individuals are on Medicaid. As long as they can, fit in a Medicaid program, so a lot of times when, essentially, again, that's why I kind of explain what Medicaid is. It's this one word, but it's not one thing. When someone applies for Medicaid, essentially they fill out an application. That's just a technical request to apply for Medicaid. How else does Medicaid know you're applying, requesting it? And there's a lot of documentation, a lot of back and forth, but ultimately, someone enters it into a Medicaid eligibility system. And what that system's trying to do is look at this person's data and check it against all the Medicaid programs. Are you eligible for what they call MAGI Medicaid? Nope, you're over income. What about SSI Medicaid? Nope, because you're not receiving SSI through Social Security. What about, disabled buy-in? Nope, because you're not working. You're disabled, but you're not working, and that's a criteria for that program. So sometimes where I was kind of going with all this is sometimes you can have two neighbors who live right next to each other who appear to have a very similar circumstance. One is going to, one's criteria fits in a program, and therefore they're eligible for Medicaid, and the other one may not.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I was asking
all
that.
because maybe one is 65 already. A lot of them cut off at 65. So if one is turned on, already 65, then a lot of those programs they're not eligible for. But the one that's still 64 is still Medicaid eligible.
Okay.
I mean, something as simple as that can mean Medicaid eligible or not.
So we're talking about the potentially moving state to state, and I was just thinking of a friend of mine that has a disabled daughter that's fully never going to be able to be on their own, right? And if they're in a program that's kind of got a benefit for them and they move to a different state, is that one of those kind of hurdles you just have to jump through and see what the new state will offer, or is it more of a federal thing when you're getting SSDI?
Well, SSDI is just a financial program, and then again, you're just going to get that basic Medicare benefit after, the 2 years. And that Medicare benefit is just basic health insurance. So for someone who's like severely disabled, who actually needs care in the home, things like that, if the family can't financially afford to set up those services, which most families can't, even high net worth families have trouble sustaining the cost of 24-hour care or a substantial home care. Usually they do turn to Medicaid. They turn to Medicaid. So a lot of times the decision whether or not you move depends on, is that state going to give us all the services? Maybe they're better off staying where they are.
So it's
and
something
every
that
state's going to be different in that regard.
A family like that would need to definitely look in advance.
Research,
Right. So that's kind of one of those nuances that just be aware of. It's not just, it's not simple.
It's not simple.
It's very complex. That's why you exist.
Yep.
So are there kind of broad categories of like who most commonly is using the long-term care Medicaid? So my experience with Medicaid is more on the, children and families side. Actually, I was on Ohio's children and family Medicaid when I was in seminary. And it was one of those things where it was a little informal. Like you got there and we're like, we moved in and we were trying to use the health insurance that came with the school, which wasn't particularly good. But then everybody else who lived in family housing clued us in. He's like, yeah, don't do that. Go down here. And they would literally the guy and the person next door, like literally showed me where to go and helped me fill out the forms to basically get the kids and family, because we're all poor seminary students. We don't make any money. Sure. And, and they're like, yeah, they're like, just do this. I'm like, oh, okay. And so that would be my experience. I think that's a lot of people, especially if you're younger, experience of Medicare or thought about Medicaid is more on that, help for poorer families that have small children. And we qualified because we had a small kid. If we didn't have a small kid, we wouldn't have gotten anything. But it was Ohio. It didn't matter. But it was not an easy process. But that's my experience of it. So what would be like a couple of typical scenarios that somebody would be wanting to look into long-term care Medicaid? Like, because I'm guessing you're younger. People who are younger or?
Well, no, not necessarily. I mean,
Okay.
I would say most people are older.
Okay.
I would start by saying definitely it's got to be for people who need a long-term care service. Okay. Right. Functionally, you have to need a long-term care service. You have to need that help in the home, assisted living.
What's the definition of long-term care, Jeremy?
Longer than 90 days.
And you have to have what? This is a quiz.
This is a quiz from a previous episode. Oh, man. You got to.
So 2 of the activities of daily living.
Yes.
You can't do.
Yes.
And Medicaid looks at those. Now, if you Google activities of daily living, I'll refer to them as ADLs moving forward, so I don't get tongue twisted here. There may be a list of like 20. Okay. And even with long-term care insurance, they're a little different. And even with VA, they're a little different the way they assess things. But with long-term care Medicaid, they break it down to 6. Okay. 6 ADLs: mobility, transferring, bathing, dressing, toileting, eating. And you have to need, so on the physical side, you have to need hands-on or equipment help with at least 2 of the 6. Okay. Or you have to, quote unquote, fail the assessment on the memory, cognition, behavior side. Okay. So some people can still do everything by themselves, but they have to be prompted, reminded, if someone wasn't there to oversee them, they wouldn't be able to do any of it. So if they don't, get past the assessment on the physical side, on the memory, cognition, behavior side, it's a little more subjective, but on a scale of 0 to 3, they have to meet at least a 2. So common things on that side are going to be, I need someone to manage my, dementia diagnosis. I need someone to manage my financial affairs, medical affairs, med management, things like that. But those things, if you need help with those things, those are common things that are going to get you in that scale.
Okay.
So first and foremost, so like you have to have a need for a long-term care service.
Okay.
And then also you have to, and so you need this long-term care service. Maybe you can't afford it, right? So that would be someone that would want to apply for a long-term care Medicaid in advance, to be able to get the service. Or a lot of what we find with a lot of our clients, they're already receiving it. Okay. They're in a nursing facility. Nursing facilities, the average private pay rate in the state of Colorado right now is like just shy of like $10,500 a month. Yeesh. But I say in the Denver metro area, even like maybe like Level and Fort Collins, you're looking at more like $12,000, $13,000 a month.
I believe
that's for a shared room. Yeah. Okay. So mom moved into the nursing facility. She's been paying her $12 or $13,000 a month. Eventually, if she lives long enough, she's going to run out of money. Right. Mm-hmm. So someone who would need long-term care Medicaid would be someone who, is running out of private pay funds, but still needs that service, right? So a lot of times people hire us when they have like and I'll talk more about what we do in a bit, but when they have anywhere from 3 months to a year's worth of money left, and we just make sure when they run out of money, it's a seamless transition from private pay, to that long-term care Medicaid. So there's no gap in coverage. That's always what our whole goal is.
Okay. And but since it's a Medicaid program, you have to be at the point where you are out of money,
Right.
Because I'm sure the states can look at it like, well, you can afford it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely if you're a single individual,
Yeah.
You have to be out of money.
Yeah, so there's some nuance there where if you're a married couple, right, there's some protections for the survivor who doesn't need care on assets.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's still very minimal, but it's still
Right.
something. And then I have a lot of people that if they need to qualify for Medicaid, they'll a lot of times get an attorney at that point to advise them on how to structure things financially to best position themselves.
Right.
Because it's dicey. Do you help with that kind of stuff? I mean, do you help with people who are in a spend down situation?
Yeah, I mean, we guide them through the spend down, help them dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure it's valid spend down sources. We will do an assessment and identify if we think there's, room for protection there. We'll explain some of that to them. And if they are interested in protection, usually we'll link an attorney to our case.
Yeah. That's kind of the experience that I've had. But it's interesting to know when to engage the attorney, which is probably why you'd be a little bit more valuable, honestly, than sometimes the attorney is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of makes sense. I mean, especially if you got a spouse, I mean, sometimes, I've seen the situation in the church where something happens to one spouse and they're in long-term care 2-3 years. And then the surviving spouse lives another 10 years. Right. And so how much, how do you, being thoughtful about like, okay, well, this other person still has to like subsist for, the time after that.
And Medicaid does have just some natural protections in place for that. Like for example, now in 2025, the resource limit for a married couple in which one is applying for Medicaid and the other one isn't is a little over $157,000. And the way I like to explain that is, vision a bucket, right? Everything with the couple Medicaid is going to ask about everything that's his and hers is his. It doesn't matter who owns it. But some of those things are going to count in the bucket and other things are not, some things are not going to count in the bucket.
Right.
So like the home the spouse lives in, it's not going to count. A family vehicle is not going to count. I mean, the general rule of thumb
when
is
you say not going to count, it's not going to count towards the 150?
bucket. Yeah, towards that 157, yeah.
Okay.
And basically what, when someone applies for Medicaid is just trying to figure out, do these assets, does their bucket runneth over? Okay.
Right.
If it's over, then they're not eligible for Medicaid. You know what I mean? They want to make sure their bucket's at or below the resource limit associated with their case, which, like I said, for those situations in which one is applying and the other one isn't, it's just a little over $157,000. That number does change every year, so it did just change.
Yep.
But
when I started this, it was like $100,000.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That was it.
But like for a single individual, the bucket's $2,000. Okay, so that's $2,000. Yeah, and that's where, or if a married couple where both of them are applying. So I'm helping a couple now; they're both in a nursing facility. They have to get down to $3,000.
Wow.
Here's the crazy thing about that. Honestly, the biggest issue when people go on to Medicaid is they don't have enough money to even get a haircut.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah. If you've only got $2,000 in the bank, I mean, wow.
Yeah. Now, if you're in a facility, basically, yeah. I mean, it's funny, and I guess before I even explain some of that, I'll say, we have people that will hire us, or I will go talk to other professionals, and sometimes these people that hire us will say, I talked to people and they told me Medicaid's the end all be all, like that's the goal here.
I've had somebody say that to me.
Yeah,
I want to be on Medicaid like all my friends.
Yeah,
I'm like, no, you don't.
And I'm like, let's talk about what that looks like.
Yeah.
It is nice to have somebody else pay for something, instead of yourself. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Yeah. But let's talk about what that life looks like. You get to keep, if you're in a nursing facility, you get to keep $106 a month. Okay. Yeah. Now, granted, you don't need a lot in a nursing facility. I actually have clients who have a hard time spending that $106 a month. If you have a man that's bald, so he doesn't need haircuts, you know what I mean, and barely gets out of bed, so he's not doing the Walmart trips, and things like that. It's a full-time job for their, power of attorneys to spend $106 a month. But if you have a woman, and not to be, sexist here, but like a lot of women who are still walking around, they still like to get their hair done.
Right.
It's a little easier to spend, they still like their makeup, and things like that. It's a little easier to spend that money. But nonetheless, it's a very, you're condensing your life down to something very small. So I think people have to ask themselves, is that the ultimate goal? And actually, I will say for a lot of people, it's the only option they have. there's not a lot of investment strategy out there that if you get yourself in a $13,000 a month situation and you live,
Right.
you know what I mean, long enough, that your investments are not going to sustain that, right?
Yep.
So
Shout out to our long-term care insurance episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
We go into detail about what that
Oh
actually
my
means,
goodness.
everybody.
Yes.
Definitely
It's
reference
quite
that
a
one.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then they go into, so this is actually one of the issues that I've seen is that people are on Medicaid, and can they just get into any facility if they're in Medicaid? So when we're talking about what that looks like they are not in a facility now, they need to get into a facility, they're qualifying for Medicaid. Is anybody just going to take them?
I will say in the state of Colorado, most nursing facilities take Medicaid. Okay. They take Medicaid and they take Medicaid day one. And that's, that's an important phrase to remember here.
Very important.
Yeah. Nursing facilities, a lot of them take Medicaid day one. And I would probably venture to say like 98% of nursing facilities take Medicaid. Okay. It's assisted livings that are not quite as Medicaid friendly. And the difference is that nursing facilities get reimbursed pretty well by Medicaid. Okay. Assisted livings don't. Now, Medicaid feels like obviously it reimburses them well, right?
I'm sure they do.
If you walk into an assisted living private pay, they're, around $6,000, $6,500 a month, give or take. Medicaid, they would get about $4,200 from Medicaid. And that actually went up substantially here recently. Like it used to be like $3,500. It just went up to the $4,200, here in the last year and a half. So a lot of times assisted livings just said, we just can't afford to take it. If we need to make a profit and we need to collect $6,000 from everybody, we just can't make a profit at $4,200 or $3,500. Now, so what you find is that most assisted livings don't take Medicaid at all. Okay? But if they do, what they say is, well, we take Medicaid, but we need you to private pay here for a certain period of time before we're willing to take that cut and reimbursement.
Right.
And that's something they will put in the contract.
Yeah.
How much it is depends on the facility. And quite frankly, it depends on even the time frame. So or their census. So if you walk in a facility one day, they may say, well, we only have one bed available. And if you want it, you can't get on Medicaid for 3 years. You've got to be able to private pay for 3 years.
Okay.
Right. So someone has to have enough assets to actually leverage themselves in and private pay for 3 years before the facility is willing to bill Medicaid. Now you walk in that same facility 2 months later, and now they have a census problem. They have 10 beds available, 15 beds available.
They'll take it.
They may take Medicaid day one, or they may take Medicaid. They may say, we just want 6 months. You may be able to leverage yourself in at a lesser rate.
Yeah. Are you seeing in Colorado people or facilities, I should say, having space?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Even down in Denver?
Yeah.
Because you live in Denver, yeah?
I live in North Denver, yeah.
North Denver. Because then if they're going in, do they have any additional leverage if they are private pay to start? And even if it's nursing,
absolutely.
You kind of get a little bit better situation.
On one hand, I'm telling you, facilities take Medicaid day one, but if they have one bed available, somebody's coming in private pay, and the other one's coming in Medicaid day one. Again, they may get a slight cut in reimbursement on Medicaid, but the other thing with facilities when they take Medicaid is Medicaid is not a guaranteed for life program, right? So you get on it, Medicaid is going to check in with them once a year at the very least,
Right.
Or somewhere along the way, Medicaid may ask for some additional documentation even mid-year, and if that person doesn't turn it in, they lose their Medicaid's terminated. And so obviously private pay is just a more secure benefit than Medicaid. So yeah, if you have two people with similar medical conditions fighting for the same nursing facility bed, you better believe they're going to take the private pay.
And ideally, not ideally, I'd say less than ideally, if you're in a Medicaid situation, you're probably not going to be in a single room.
Right.
Definitely not.
Probably going to have other people in your room.
Yeah.
No privacy.
Yeah. Oh, I was sitting here thinking, I don't know. I've probably been in a dozen different facilities in Northern Colorado, and then a little bit down in Denver, just visiting people, and the variance in quality. We talked about this. And what was the episode we talked about? Help placements. nursing home placements.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
assisted living
yeah.
placements.
Senior Care Authority.
Senior Care Authority.
Yeah.
And that's one thing you notice, and I have noticed that there is a tremendous variation in just the quality of facility, how nice facility is, how nice the rooms are. You know, I mean, I think everyone's trying hard. I mean, they're all licensed and regulated, so there's only so bad it can get. But you know, there definitely is a difference, you know, between it. So even being able to private pay for a few couple of years or whatever probably moves you up into a different tier of facility, if you will.
I've seen it. You get treated differently,
Yeah.
for sure,
Yeah.
if you can private pay to start.
Well, and I think too, I mean, I will say, so a few things. One, the average person, even private paying, are still private paying for a shared room. They're
Right.
paying $13,000 for a shared room.
Shared room.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Like I'm a financial power of attorney for a guy now who is in a private room, not even in a Taj Mahal facility, I would say just a decent facility. Now it does take Medicaid, but, and he does have a single room and it's just shy of $18,000 a month for the single room.
Whoa.
You know,
Now,
now
when
he
you
has a
say
substantial amount of assets, but he, you know, 18,000 is a
But
lot
what
of
are you
money.
getting for that? Like, what services are you actually getting for that? You know what I
Good
mean?
question.
Like,
Yeah. I mean, definitely 3 meals a day. Somebody, you know, checking on him.
is he
does
being
need.
fed those meals? 'Cause
I know, right? He's
gold-
not. I mean, he can.
gold.
They put the plate in front of him.
cutlery.
Yeah. Yep. They put the plate in front of him, and he feeds himself.
But the amount of medical staff around, and they're
Yeah.
not cheap.
Well,
I
I
mean,
used to own I owned a memory care facility myself that we sold in 2020, and I will say facilities don't make as much money as you think.
No.
Now, we weren't nursing facility; we were just assisted living, you know. But you would assume based on what we were collecting, we were making more than we were, you know. But when you care about residents, and so you have a lot of staff, right? That definitely eats at the bottom line for
yeah,
sure.
the staff is what gets you.
Yeah.
There was about a year ago, there was an article that came out, some originally from Montana, and it was about this whole spat of assisted living places in kind of the more far-flung places, and how many were just closing down, and
Yeah.
they literally could not afford staff. And it was just there was too many other things to do. Montana's growing too much. There's other places for medical professionals to work, because if you're qualified as a nurse or a CNA or whatever to work at a nursing home facility or assisted living, you're qualified to work a lot of other places.
Right.
And so that market got really, really competitive. So you're competing with, you know, people who might want to work in primary care or work at a hospital or work, you know, in all these other places that some people, you know, and you know, but the Medicaid rates are locked, right? I mean, so they did not adjust with inflation, you know, very quick or at all. I don't know. You probably know better than I do. But when that inflation hit a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, when it got really, really bad, it closed a bunch of them, because then they're like, we're not making as much money as you think we're making here. And it's staff. It's just how much staff you have to have and what that staff costs, because they have to be, it's not just guy off the street. It's skilled, trained, credentialed people. And and fair enough. I mean, if I've gone to school and got credentialed and trained and, you know, did all this stuff to learn how to, you know, to be a nurse or whatever it is, then yeah, kind of expect to make a decent amount of money.
Yep.
Yeah.
At least a livable wage, right?
Right. You know,
Wow.
it's a
And that's the hard
combination
part.
of government program and free market. It's like,
Well, and the, you know, the inflation environment we lived in over the last 5 years.
oh
and,
yeah.
I mean, that's pushed up pricing, and then that's just been this kind of, you know, problem that's compounded, and we're seeing it in our own personal insurance, right? Premiums on our homes in Colorado.
Yeah.
Do you think people aren't going to see the same thing in the cost of care in Colorado?
Yeah.
Well, we actually had quite a few facilities close here in Colorado.
Oh, we did?
You know, during COVID or right out of COVID.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of it was because, you know, and I don't specialize in this, so I probably can't, I don't know if I should bring it up, but, you know, it's the staffing. So what happened was a lot of, you know, staffing people were out, right, with COVID for weeks. And so the facility started having to hire these staffing agencies. That would be, instead of paying their staff, you know, $17 an hour, these staffing agencies were, you know, $40 an hour. Well, then all of a sudden, you know, the staff that actually worked there, the employees of the nursing facility, were like, well, hey, I can actually go work for these staffing agencies
They have $40 an hour.
and make more money. I mean, even if they only
Even
make
if they take a
25,
cut,
you know, that's still better. So a lot of facilities just started losing their regular $17 an hour, you know, staff.
Right.
And then, you know, the Medicaid reimbursement rate wasn't changing. And then plus, like, a lot of, you know, they were having to close off like sections of their facility for COVID to be like quarantine units. So they had like less money coming in. The Medicaid rates weren't increasing, but their staffing was like, their, you know, staffing costs were like almost doubling, if not doubling.
Right.
and they just couldn't stay afloat.
Yeah, it's the perfect storm for them. I mean, because it's just like you've got literally the most vulnerable population of what's going on right now. And yet you've got a lot of pressure. I remember my late wife was a nurse practitioner, and the amount of money flying around, in some of those other places, and what people were just trying to keep doors open at all these, different, not just assisted living, but all kinds of places.
Okay, so you painted the picture for us. We kind of have an understanding of what Medicaid is. Not awesome. But
if you need it,
it is a safety net. And the next piece I have for you is, okay, what do you do to help people around Medicaid?
Yeah.
Kind of paint me that picture, would you?
Yeah, so I'd probably say the average individual comes to us, and I mentioned this earlier, with about, anywhere from a week's worth of money. Or sometimes, they ran out last week. Sometimes they're already at a point where they actually need it. But we try to tell people, like, don't wait till the last minute. So the average person comes to us with about 3 months to 12 months of money left. Now, how much that is depends on their income and, what their expenses.
Stuff.
But that allows us, so what we do with that situation, we do an analysis of their case. Basically, we figure out where they are, where they need to be to get the Medicaid, and we come up with a plan on how we're going to get there. One of the most difficult things about getting Medicaid is I always tell people, you're guilty until you're proven innocent. So, we start helping them dot the I's, cross the T's. We basically look at the case through the lens of a Medicaid technician. So our goal is to get whatever Medicaid's going to need from that client and family in advance. And then we guide them through the spend down. Medicaid cares about what people are doing with their money. If you need long-term care Medicaid, and I can elaborate more on this in a second, Medicaid cares how you're spending your money and how you have spent it in the last 5 years. So a lot of times it's just
that was one of my questions. 5 years. They look back 5 years.
Yeah.
At this time.
At this time.
There's been talk of them making it 7 years.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So we help them, get all that documentation together. We'll help them complete the application. Like I said, make sure we guide them through the spend down. And then we essentially complete a 100% packet, and then we take it from there. So we'll deliver the documents, make all follow-up phone calls, represent them in any meetings, if any, and essentially take them through the approval that we're looking for. If we don't get that approval, we'll do non-attorney advocacy in the case of an appeal. So essentially, we just make sure that when that individual runs out of money, in a perfect world, we already have the Medicaid. We're proactive. We started working on it, 8 months ago when they had 8 months of money. Any issues they had, we had money that gave us time and solutions to resolve it, So we'll get on a case, start resolving issues, start compiling our packet, and then really we just make sure, in a perfect world, the nurses, for example, if they're in a nursing facility, we want them all the way through Medicaid in that nursing facility having their Medicaid billing form, hopefully the week before they actually need to start billing on that form. So that's our goal when we say seamless transition from private pay to Medicaid, where the nursing facility never feels like they have to render services and not get paid. So, but again, we specialize with anything with eligibility. So that's our most common service, is that we help people through that process. And that process is very similar for people who are in assisted living, or home care. The process is actually exactly the same. It's just the benefit they're going to get at the tail end of that, is what's different. But we can just have one meeting with people. Like, actually, one of the most common services we provide is that sometimes people, they may have $200,000 or $300,000, but they just move mom into a nursing facility again at $13,000 a month. Well, all of a sudden, $200,000 doesn't seem like that much money anymore, right?
Yep.
So they just want to they just want to talk to somebody now. They've heard a lot of different things. They don't know what's true, what's not true, and they just want to have a 2-hour meeting with somebody, to basically say, if mom does live long enough, and run out of money, what is this going to look like, So we find that 2-hour meeting to be super informative, and so even at that meeting, we may say it's worth going to see an attorney and seeing if there's room for protection. Some people are interested in that, some people aren't. But that's when we'd have those conversations. But what we find with long-term care Medicaid in terms of educating people is not only telling them what to do, but it's just as important to make sure they know what not to do. When people are running out of money, they typically want to, my grandson's starting college. You know what I mean? I'd love to be able to pay for a semester of his college and things like that. Give it all away. Yeah. And they need to understand Medicaid's stance on that, which is the general rule of thumb for Medicaid is when someone applies for Medicaid, Medicaid has the right to care about everything they have done with their money or their spouse, even if that spouse is deceased now. Them or their spouse has done with their money in the last 5 years.
Okay.
Now, they don't really care, like, hey, Merry Christmas, everybody, here's $25. I've been giving everybody $25, you know what I mean, since the beginning of time. And now I have seen some technicians care about that, but typically speaking, you know, you're fine if you've done little things like that. But what most people have done is, you know, my daughter lost her job a few years ago. And I, as a mother, I don't want my child not to eat and not be able to feed her, you know, children. So I gave my daughter $3,000 a month for 3 or 4 months to make sure she, you know, could keep her apartment and feed her kids. Medicaid cares about that. You know, I had a car. I'm 85. I wasn't driving anymore. It was collecting dust, you know, in my driveway. My grandson turned 16. I gave him the car for $1 or $5, but it was really a $5,000 car. Medicaid cares about that. That's a gift. You know, other common things we see are like you know, the IRS says you can gift a certain amount per year and not be taxed. Medicaid says, well, if you did that, we care. So even government rules, you know, government rules do not align, you know. So we'll have people that come to us that have given that, you know, the IRS gift limit every year to multiple children. And that's a huge problem, you know, because Medicaid says every penny of it is a gift.
And the logic is you could have held on to that to pay for this.
Yeah.
Right.
You can't just give away it all, right? And that's why they have the look back period, so they can recover those things, and they will be recovered pretty much.
And basically what Medicaid says is, and just hypothetically hear me out here. Okay, so you submit an application. Let's go back to our just February 1st date that I used earlier. And Medicaid says, John, we would have started paying for your care on February 1st. But since you gifted, and I'm just using round figures here, you know, $30,000 in the last 5 years, we're not going to pay for your care for 3 months.
Okay.
It's a time penalty based on the amount gifted.
Okay.
So there's not going to pay for those long-term care services for that time. I actually have a big gifting case right now that I met with yesterday. And this guy was a veteran, and his grandson was buying his first home. And he thought he was going to help his grandson out by letting him get a VA loan. So he basically, you know, so there wouldn't be a down payment, or there'd be a lesser of a down payment. So this gentleman basically purchased the home for his grandson for this VA loan.
With the VA loan. Okay.
This grandson put about $150,000 in the home. He can't prove he did a lot of the stuff under the table because he's kind of like a contractor himself. So a lot of stuff was in cash. He can only prove materials. And then at the tail end of it, he bought the home from his grandfather for basically just what the loan was worth, which was about $271,000. But the home was actually worth over $400,000. So Medicaid is going to consider that to be a $130,000 gift, you know?
Okay.
So people do things like this that they have no, it's like loving families do things like this.
Yeah.
Right? And that's a common thing I say. I'm like, usually I find the more loving and trusting a family is with each other, like the way a family is supposed to be, the more difficult it can be for that individual to get on long-term care Medicaid. Because a lot of times they have done some quirky thing like this, you know what I mean? Because they trust each other, right? And they love each other, and they want to help each other.
Right.
And it can get complicated.
Yeah. What, you know, in my profession, you know, the biggest thing I run to actually was when people loan money or something like that, or even give money, right?
Yeah.
Either it's a gift or it's a loan, one of the two. You got to make it one. And they're like, well, I'm just loaning the money, you know, and if something happens to me, I'll just forgive them or whatever. But technically, you have to follow the rules, which are, even though you're loaning them money, you have to have a fair interest rate. Right? Well, nobody ever charges their family member interest, right?
Right. No.
Well, technically they should. And if you're audited, technically you're supposed to do the fair market rate at the time. So if you loaned them $100,000 and say the fair market rate's 5%, then $5,000 of income is what the person who's loaning the money should be paying the IRS, right?
Yeah.
So the IRS cares about those kinds of things. And I try and help people see, like, hey, we need to do this above board. And so many people, like you said, it's just family is family, and you want to help family, and you don't want to burden family. And but there's still ways you have to design it. So
and even loan, that's an interesting scenario that we see a lot of our clients get into as well, because they come to us and they say, I didn't gift my grandson $25,000. I gifted him, I loaned it to him. And that's actually worse.
Yeah, because what's the payback period? What's the terms? What's the interest rate?
Well, and Medicaid says the unpaid principal balance of the loan is a countable asset. So if you're a single individual and you consider that a loan and you still have $20,000 of unpaid principal balance, then you can't get Medicaid eligible.
And they can't pay it back to you.
And they can't pay it back. So
It's even worse. Okay.
then it's like,
Wow.
well, it's just a gift.
Wow.
I mean, so it's funny. So going back to, there's multiple Medicaid programs, right? And they all have different eligibility criteria, different benefit packages here. A lot of them are easy to get. It was probably fairly easy for you. You walked in, filled out an application, maybe turned in some check stubs, a few things, a few
I was
months later.
actually really surprised they didn't, at least in that time in Ohio, they didn't even ask us about assets.
Okay.
Because
Well,
we had
that
sold
program-
a house.
That was
Yeah.
a long time ago.
We sold a house, and there was a nice chunk of money sitting there, but there wasn't a lot of income coming in.
And that's where I think some programs are easier to get than others, because a lot of the programs don't look at assets. So the program, the family and children-based program you were on, is only an income. If you meet the citizenship requirements, the residency requirements of the state, and income requirements, you're on the program.
Yep.
Any asset-based program where they're looking at assets, but especially with long-term care with that 5-year look-back period, it is a lot more difficult to get, for sure. And so I think a lot of times what I saw in the state when I would say people just thought it was easy. They didn't know what they didn't know. I mean, I still see that. I mean, you're talking to that family the other day. They're like, well, I'm just going to walk in and figure this out. They assume because they had a neighbor or a cousin who just walked in and got it. Like, why would I hire somebody to help me when it was that easy for them to go in and they did it for free?
Yep.
But with long-term care Medicaid, it is like a completely different animal compared to the other programs. And that's why we exist, right? I mean, I always tell people, would I have a company that helps people get on long-term care Medicaid if it were easy for everybody to go do it themselves? No, but it is difficult. So that's why we exist.
So
the
tough question here. How well do you know the Medicaid folks in Colorado? Are you on a first name basis?
Well, I know them all pretty well, and I have a good relationship with a lot of them. But one of the benefits of using our services now is that we actually have our own contracted Medicaid technician that we use. So part of the fee families pay us, we actually send our applications to this Medicaid technician to expedite it, to not have to deal with, standing in line for 6 months or constantly getting someone new every time. And what I found when we dealt with the counties is that I was responsible for training them through these complicated situations. You know what I mean? Like,
they
had
people
never
at the county.
Yeah, they would
don't
say,
know what
I'm
they're
going to
doing.
deny this case because this life estate. And I'm like, no, let me just send this rule to you. Let me tell you what a life estate is, and I'm going to send the rule about how Medicaid's supposed to treat it. You know what I mean? And I'd be the one to kind of walk her through the case.
Got it.
Even though I'm not her manager, her trainer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of been nice to not have to know we used to send a packet, it'd be like, are you getting somebody brand new? Is it gonna be their first application they've ever processed? Or are you gonna get somebody experienced who knows? Because the reality is this, we rarely deal with easy Medicaid cases. If it's super easy, most of the time people are gonna go do it themselves. It's the more complicated ones that we get, right? So it would always be super, super difficult if we got a technician who didn't know what they were doing.
I would expect you probably have a pretty decent relationship with the people on the Medicaid side, because I'm like, I'd rather deal on a complicated case. I'd rather deal with you as somebody who knows what they're doing and I can have a conversation with than Joe off the street who doesn't even know, what the words mean.
Right.
I mean, like, I don't know what you're asking me.
Well, and I would say that, and one of our biggest referral sources has gotten to be elder law attorneys, and it's because if there's not a legal issue attached to the case or a protection, they don't really want to do just Medicaid applications anymore. And they know, and I think counties would prefer to deal with us versus an elder law attorney too, because we're not just gonna, a lot of elder law attorneys' strategies is just let it deny, and then we're just going to fight them in an appeal. Well, no nursing facility who's taking care of this person wants that strategy, first of all, and they're just going to hound the family, which is super stressful. But also, like, we know, like, we're willing to talk to you in advance. You know what I mean? Let's figure this out. Like, we don't want to, we're happy to appeal it if we can't agree, but, we just feel like playing nice in the same sandbox can get us,
Do you have
way.
any information on, like, what is it typically time period for someone to go through this if they're doing it on their own, and how long does it take versus if you guys do it, how long does it take you guys to do it?
So the state of Colorado owns the contract, but they administer it at the county level. So you are going to find the timing varies per county, but I would say just if I had to put an average across all 64 counties, you're looking at about anywhere from, most of them are going to fall within the 3 to 6 month range. Okay. A lot of the Denver metro ones are going to be more in the 6 month range. Larimer County, I think they're a little closer to 3 months. A lot of the smaller counties can get it done, more than 3 months. So for us, we usually get it done in about 30 to 45 days.
Oh, wow.
That's pretty good savings on time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and again, if I'm on the receiving end of that packet, I'm going to look at it and go, oh, gosh, somebody who knows what they're doing filled this thing out. Thank you, Jesus. Right? I mean, it's like, that'd be good. So with the time we got left, I'm curious, so how long and how complicated it is certainly probably a bit of a misconception, out there. I will confess, before Roy sent me this topic, I didn't even know this was a thing. And part of it, I'm just not demographically in that world yet. But are there other kind of couple or common misconceptions that people have that we can clear up for them about how this works?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say, so, a few things. One, obviously in order to go after long-term care Medicaid, you have to have the functional need. I mentioned that.
Right.
And then I mentioned the 5-year look-back period, and that's an issue. But the other things are just like, the financial requirements, right? You have to meet the income and resource standards. But I will say that a lot of people presume they don't meet it or they will never meet it. And they're surprised, that they do. So like, for example, with long-term care Medicaid, they just look at the individual applying. Mm-hmm. So they don't look at if you're married, they don't look at the spouse's income. The spouse could actually still be working. I've actually helped an executive whose spouse was, or the spouse was an executive making well into the 6-digit figures, but the applicant I was applying for only made $800 in Social Security. So he met the income criteria. That spouse paid for care for a long time, assuming they wouldn't be eligible because she made a lot. But they only look at his, and then quite frankly, even the income limit for him is pretty high. So for 2025, it's $2,901. But even if you're over that, you can jump through some extra hoops. That's a whole nother podcast. Those extra hoops. But you can jump through those extra hoops. So really, if you make really anything less than about $11,000, $12,000, so if you make less than 11 or 12 grand, but over 2,901, you can still be income eligible. So a lot of times people just assume since dad's making $5 grand a month, that he's never going to be eligible for Medicaid, and he can be. He's just got to jump through a few extra hoops. Gotcha. Easy to do, not a problem, And even with assets too, people are surprised, especially with those married couples, like, how easy it is to protect things for the spouse. And also even for the single individuals. I mean, even though they have to get down to $2,000, it's like just meeting with a professional, just making sure you've taken care of all these things. Have you walked into a mortuary and prepaid for your burial or cremation? Medicaid allows that. Those don't count in the bucket.
Okay.
So we just deal with a lot of cases who hire us, and it's like, dang, I wish you'd have hired us 6 months ago. We could have done better for you, So I always say, if you are in a situation where your loved one or yourself, think long-term care is in your near future, it is worth sitting with a professional and just learning more about your options, seeing what, and even if you're not interested in protection, but I just feel like knowledge is power, right?
Well, and you had said, one of your most popular appointments is a one-off appointment just to sit down and understand what the rules are. And frankly, who wouldn't love that? But the guy at the county doesn't have time to do that with you. You can't go to make an appointment with the person at the county and say, hey, maybe in 3 years I might need this. Can you tell me about it?
And legally, they can't give you advice.
Oh, yeah, right, of course.
They're there to process the Medicaid application, So I think a lot of times when people go into the county office to get their application processed, they think somebody's going to walk them through it. And, like this person's on their side. And not that county workers are bad, but legally they can't tell you anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? They can just tell you, I'm missing this bank statement. You turn in the bank statement, it shows that you have too much money, denied. You know what I mean? Like, they're not going to say, well, let me tell you how to spend the money on this bank, on this bank account.
So for you then, if someone wants to do a consult with you, obviously they just reach out to you and schedule it. But do you charge for a consult? Is there hey, let's take a look what's going on here, see what we need to do, or how does that work? Just so people have some clarity.
So we do a free phone consultation. Now on that free phone consultation, we'll usually collect general information and give general information. Not that we're trying to be greedy, and say you have to pay us, but a lot of times the advice people want is, if I sell my mom's car, my mom owed me $5 grand, can she pay me back? Well, we can't answer that because I need to see the receipts. Like, I know Medicaid's going to consider that a gift, and I don't want to give you bad advice. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And we're not going to get that far on a free phone consultation. You know what I mean? So that's one of those one meeting type cases. But a lot of times that people are asking very complicated questions. We're not going to answer that kind of stuff on free phone consultations. But if someone just wants some good general information about long-term care Medicaid and a little one-off question here and there, we do a free phone consultation. But then from there, we would schedule an appointment if they had more detail. Yeah. Yep. For that one meeting, or to hire us for that whole shebang where we help them from wherever they are in the process all the way through the approval. But we have a main number and a general email that we find works best to contact. I'd love to tell everybody to call me, but we can serve you much better, if you call the main line, and then they can get you booked from there and figure out the best service. But
yeah, that's one of the things we talked about too, off when we first met was, it's like, do you do pro bono in this case or not? Right. Mm-hmm. The difficulty is, and we talked about this, is that if you do, those people just up and ghost you, and you just spend a bunch of hours on somebody who then doesn't even use your services to actually get approved because they didn't want to jump through whatever hoop they had to jump through to be able to do it properly. So we talked about that too. So I think it's smart that, largely speaking, you don't really do that because I just think that's a big waste of time.
But everything we do is on a flat rate basis, and we're able to quote them over the phone. So part of that consultation is us asking the questions to be able to quote them the fee that we would charge them. And whether it takes us 1 week or it takes us all year, whether somebody has 2 months of money and we're going to get through it quick and apply, the person who hired us that has 8 months of money is the same rate. And even if it takes us 2 months or 8 months, it's still the same flat rate. People know that in advance. They know that before they even schedule the meeting, because we want to that's how we make sure we're a good fit, right?
Yep.
For them. So we're very transparent in that regard.
Well, and I think most people, once they understand, I mean, we pay for expertise.
Sure.
You pay for expertise. You're going to a doctor, you're paying for that doctor's expertise. You go to a lawyer, you pay for somebody who knows what they're doing, and you compensate for the time. And that was the fact that it's flat rate. I like that. That makes that I think makes it really transparent and helpful for people.
I actually compare our services to possibly like an accountant, right?
Right.
Some people can file their taxes on their own, but if you have a complicated scenario, if you really want to have somebody to ask questions and help you, you hire an accountant. They're not attorneys. Like we're not attorneys, but they do have an expertise that's going to help you deal with this government. Or like a real estate agent. You can sell your house on your own. Right. You don't have to have a real estate agent. However, you know what I mean? There's a lot of, red tape.
You can avoid.
Exactly. And even though you're going to pay, a lot of times it's worth it, to pay. So I would say I would compare what we do with Medicaid to a real estate agent or accountant.
Okay. That
nice.
Makes sense.
So then one last service I wanted to make sure we talked about, because I do run into this a lot, is that there's people out there that exist that they don't have anybody. Yep. Right. So I was even thinking when you were talking, like this person who gets this once a year check-in, but they have dementia. They can't check on anything. They have no family. Like, who takes care of them?
Right.
And you guys offer a sort of service that does help with that.
Yep. So we can become someone's financial power of attorney. So we do have a fiduciary section, so to speak, a fiduciary division now. And how we kind of got into that role is in 2015, 2016. We do a lot of work for nursing facilities where they hire us, and they'll say, hey, John's in our facility. We can't get him on Medicaid because Medicaid wants all these bank statements and all these things. Can you, Jennifer, Helping Hands, can you come out here and see if you can help him get on it? And we'd go out there and meet John, and he wouldn't even know his name. More or less where he banked. And even if he did know, he was not in a mental capacity or cognitive capacity to ethically, you know what I mean? Help him.
Yeah.
So we started becoming court-appointed conservator for those individuals. Okay. So we can do things on a short-term basis or like a special conservator or permanent. So sometimes John, he may need Medicaid now, but he's got a house to sell, so who's ever going to sell that house, right? So sometimes we go get on Medicaid, and then we start the legal process of trying to get that house sold, and we can become that court-appointed conservator. And again, like I said, whether it is to get somebody Medicaid or not, sometimes our client, we get on these cases, a hospital will call us and say, this guy has a house, we think he has a lot of money, but he's got to go to long-term care. He can't cut the check. He doesn't
do any of it.
He can't do any of it. You know what I mean?
So
UC Health the hospitals get stuck with them because part of a discharge plan is nursing facility. Can you medically take care of this person? And how are they going to financially pay? And a nursing facility is not going to take someone if he's not able to write a check and there's no one that can do it on his behalf.
Right.
So we become court-appointed conservator for a lot of those individuals. But even, the scenario comes up where, and we don't take as many of these, but we do, take them, is that, hey, I'm John, I'm of capacity, I'm 85 years old, I'm in a nursing facility, I'm totally with it, but I just need help. I just can't manage my life from here. I can't sell my house from, this nursing facility room. It's super difficult, but I'd love to appoint you, Helping Hands, as my financial power of attorney. And as long as they can still sign legal documents, they can appoint us to actually manage their affairs and not have to go through the courts. So the difference is if someone's of capacity, they can appoint someone. If they're not, or they can't sign legal documents, we're going to have to go through the court process. Yeah.
Right.
So very niche, right?
But
not a huge thing that you're actually out there doing, but it's something that's really important to be done. And I had a really unique situation too, where I had a client that was actually helping someone that they cared for, a friend, if you will, and their friend didn't really have the capacity to do anything for themselves. But my client was actually in a situation where their health was declining, and they I can't do this either. Right. So what do I do?
I have seen this honestly all the time.
Yeah.
You know, especially like neighbors or, you know, basically non-relatives who have a more almost like a relative-y relationship, you know, almost have a sisterly relationship. That tends to be how it works. You know, because women tend to live longer than men. But these people who have these almost sisterly relationships, and then you find out, they're not actually related, and you've been taking care of this person and helping with all that stuff, and they get to the point where they can't do it anymore. But the other person who's been doing it the whole time has no legal standing.
Yep.
You know, and sometimes themselves are also facing their own
health issues,
and isn't a long-term option. So I don't also wonder if this isn't going to be one of those things that is going to become more widespread just demographically, because we have more and more people who just didn't have kids. I think my older sister, she didn't have kids. And so we're talking through now, okay, Jen, what do you want? You know, who's taking care of what for you down the line? Because honestly, I'm only 16 months younger than you. So, you know,
and
how do you want all this to work?
Yeah. And it's a lot of work for whoever it is. We find with those neighbors who say, I'll be your financial power of attorney, you know, and everybody's living their life just fine. And then when the incident happens and their power of attorney has to be enforced, they're like, holy crap.
I didn't know what that meant. And
we actually take over a lot of cases like that, because eventually these friends they have their own family. They have their own life. You know what I mean? And they've been trying to help this person. And then, you know, all of a sudden they're responsible for selling houses and cars and estate sales and, you know, all these things. And they're like, this is too much, you know?
So if I am someone's power of attorney, financially permanent financial power of attorney, can I turn that over to somebody else without going through the courts?
It depends on the document, but sometimes, for a lot of the cases we've taken out of hospitals, it's there was a financial power of attorney, you know, they can't handle it anymore. Now this person's stuck in UC Health, the power of attorney's jump ship, you know, saying I revoke it, I can't do it. And then the hospital will have to hire us, you know, to become conservator, because now this person's not of capacity to appoint somebody else. That's typically what happens. I mean, I'm sure there may be a few legal windows if there were other people to step up, but, you know, not every family is a loving family. You know, we were talking about it's great if it is, but, you know, a lot of times with the people we help are people that are estranged from their, you know, kids, or their kids are just so busy, or they're out of state, and maybe they love dad, but they just don't want to, you know, become his court-appointed conservator and deal with all the things.
They got kids at home.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Cool.
So lots of stuff. So Medicaid, conservatorship, really uniqueness, needing help. Right. That's specifically who's going to be really looking for your situation to reach out. And we'll make sure to have your information in our episode. And I'll just actually have you send me what you want me to, that phone number, all that good stuff.
You got a website you want to shout out real quick while you're on it?
Yes, www.helpwithltcmedicaid.com. So that LTC stands for long-term care. Helpwithltcmedicaid.com.
Fantastic. Well, I say this every single time, but I learned so much.
I'm telling you, man, there's just so much in this world to understand and get help with, and nobody can do it alone.
Right.
I mean, we need help and experts, and we need to share the information and get it out there. So hopefully people can enjoy this and share it with people who might need help in the future.
Yeah. Because I think it is an important program. It is doing important work. We don't want people languishing at that. I mean, I'm glad that Medicare and Medicaid and all these programs exist. When I see that come out of my taxes, I'm like, good. I'm glad that's out there helping people, and I'm glad there's some checks and balances to making sure that it's actually doing what I expect it and think it should be doing, and helping people who need the help and all that. So I was thinking about that. We were talking about all the rules and stuff, and I'm like, yeah, but as a taxpayer, I'm probably okay with the fact that the bar is a little high.
Yeah.
And I'm glad there's people like you to help people, across that bar.
And I was going to ask this earlier and I forgot, but I wanted to know, do you have any information just around how healthy is the Medicaid system here in Colorado? Is it, how are they doing financially? Do you have any idea or any facts around that you could share with people?
I don't usually keep up with stuff like that, but I will tell you from working at the state Medicaid office, the state of Colorado believes in Medicaid, and they, if there's an expansion, we were one of the states that did covered the Medicaid expansion group with the Affordable Care Act. They believe in making sure all Coloradans have health insurance, if they're eligible. So I have to believe, they're doing pretty good. I will say long-term care Medicaid, even though it's only 20 or 30% of who's covered total by the, Medicaid in Colorado, it does cover 70 to 80% of the expenditures, which is why it's nice to have all those protections in place. I always tell families when they get frustrated about these protections, they get mad that they can't, that mom isn't gonna be able to give them money or whatever. I say, if she could, there would not even be a program to apply for. You know what I mean?
Right.
The government could not sustain covering everybody under long-term care Medicaid. So they have to put these things in place. But I really feel like Colorado is actually a very difficult state to get Medicaid in, comparatively speaking. I have a client now who's going to choose to go after Kansas, move there. They live in the far eastern, border, and they're going to go over to Kansas because Kansas is a little easier. So Colorado in general is a difficult place to get Medicaid. But I feel like they believe in Medicaid. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They have a pretty good setup over there.
Right. But if you get it, you're gonna keep it.
Yeah.
It's gonna get paid for.
Yeah.
Well, and that's why you exist, because there might be some hoops to jump through. This isn't Oprah where you get one, you get one.
Right.
You got to go through the process, make sure you qualify properly, and that's good that Colorado is overseeing that way, so that they're being good fiduciaries of the money that's being paid to them, right?
Yeah. And I always tell people, if they don't use us, which I think we're the best, obviously,
of
the most knowledgeable, but in the event
you're the best one I know.
Thank you. In the event they choose not to use us, I always tell people, don't go through the process alone. Go hire somebody else.
Right.
Are there very many of you in this state?
There's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's not. But even if you hire an elder law attorney, like I said, most of them don't really want to do a lot of that work anymore, but some of them still will, even hire an elder law attorney. People just don't know what they don't know. And a lot of times determinations are wrong. You know what I mean? So it's good to have that professional in place to be able to fight and know what the expectation is and ensure that your case.
Explain to the people what the rules
Yeah.
are. This is what the rule is.
Yeah. Yep.
Well,
But thank you guys for having me. Yeah.
Yes, thanks. It's been wonderful having you. We'll definitely get your information out there. And if people are interested enough, she did drop a hint that we could potentially do another podcast on the intricacies that you referenced earlier.
Yeah.
If people are that interested, we could always do that in the future.
Yeah.
So drop a like and share with this with you guys want to hear more.
Yeah. We always want your questions and feedback about what you hear on the podcast. Helps us figure out some content. We don't seem to be struggling too much to find content, but we love it better when we have those things. And yes, Jennifer, thank you for coming and hanging out with us this morning. It's been really great, and I've really enjoyed it. This is another longer one. I'm looking over here, but there was just so much good stuff. Yep. So, but yes, please like, subscribe, share with your friends. You got somebody who might be in this situation, or send them a link to the podcast, and listen to this, and then call for your free consult with Helping Hands, and you'll be even that much more ready to go.
That's right.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. Appreciate you. Thank you, Roy. Thank you, Jennifer.
Yep. Bye, everybody.
CWA is a Securities and Exchange Registered Investment Advisor. No content contained herein should be construed as an offer for investment advice or an offer for the purchase or sale of any security, insurance, or other investment product. Investments involve the risk of low loss, including loss of principal. Please consult with a qualified financial, tax, or legal professional before implementing any strategy presented here. Data presented here are obtained from believed reliable sources but cannot be guaranteed as to completeness or accuracy.